that's what drew me to club soccer in this role of like, how do you water that plant of a kid who has a dream? And how do you, whether that's a love of the game, whether that's, wanting to be part of something special, whether that's wanting to play college soccer, how do our responsibilities to put them in an environment where all those things are attainable.
Hey everyone, it's Brian McDonough and welcome back to another episode of the Soccer Stories podcast. I'm really excited for this one today. We have the technical director, Joe Nemzer from the Ukrainian Nationals. Ukrainian Nationals, an elite youth program in the Philadelphia suburbs. They've been around for quite some time. In fact, their team at one point was first division in the American Soccer League. They've won multiple U.S. Open Cups. They have a really unique history there. And then in present day, the youth teams have been just dominating, men's and women's. And today we have the heart and soul, you call it the heart of the game, behind the Ukrainian Nationals. We have Joe Nemzer here. Joe, how's it going?
Good, man. Thank you for having me.
Of course. No, thanks for coming on. And let's kick it off. I'm curious about Ukrainian Nationals. I kind of led into a little bit about the history there. Tell us a little bit more about that and going a little bit way back.
Yeah, super unique club. I think the club started around 1950. And at that time, there was a lot of these, clubs that had started through immigration and through people that came to the States and brought sort of that European culture over to the U.S. and used soccer as sort of a common ground to bring people together from, home countries or other, not even just necessarily the country that they're named after, but other countries around the world. And we were sort of the preeminent model, I would say, in the 1950s from a soccer perspective. Won 4 U.S. Open Cup titles in the 60s. We're tied for second most among all active and former clubs that have won that cup. So a lot of history there, a lot of players that have come through the national team during that time. So club started around in 1950 and really in the 50s and 60s was the preeminent destination for elite soccer on the men's side during that time period. So really cool lineage, really cool history, hosted some of the top clubs, not just in the country, but in the world. And, the more I sort of dove into it when I first came to the club several years ago, and, a lot of these family members of these guys that played are still around, still prevalent around the club. We have a Ukrainian board, Trizo board that is, continues to share the story of the history of the club. So really unique. And now, our youth side is getting to sort of write the next chapter, which is really exciting.
That's really exciting. And the facilities are amazing. I've actually had the chance to travel out to the Trizo club a couple times on different occasions for some festivals and whatnot. And I've been inside the bar. You see some of the teams, the friendlies that, I think Manchester United's been on campus in the past, like Celtic maybe. You see all those pennants in the bar. It's like a real old fashioned soccer bar. It's pretty cool.
Big time. I mean, it's such a unique place where, you typically right now in youth soccer, you go to a field, you leave the field, and that's really your tie, where when you walk into our clubhouse, you feel the presence of the last 75 years. You don't feel like you're sort of in an island. You feel like you're part of something really big. And, from the pennants that are up there to the trophies, we have that bar right behind there, all the trophies, former, current, really, really cool sort of tie to the past while we're sort of, present in the current state of youth soccer.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I'd imagine for the youth players, do you think they recognize that a little bit? Is there a drive behind that? Do they understand like the history of the hollow grounds of that?
For sure, I think to a degree. I think, our players really understand that they're part of something really big.
Sure.
I also think that they have a drive to write their chapter within that story, which is really cool. And I think kind of provides a unique experience as a youth athlete, right? But when you walk into the clubhouse, you can't help but feel that tie, and I think what motivates a lot of our kids is there's a standard to live up to, particularly for the older players. I think for the younger ones, it's pure, which we love in terms of their love of the game and everything. But our older players, there's a lot that they're trying to live up to, from whether it's writing their own narrative or eclipsing something or whatever it might be. That's sort of, you can't help but feel that tie as you walk into our club, for sure.
And let's talk about your role in making that happen as the technical director. So behind the scenes, everything that you do to make sure that the product on the field, that the players are playing the best they possibly can, that they're, let's say maybe those IDPs are there over a certain amount of time, right? To get them to that next level. Can you talk a little bit about what it is that you do day to day?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is relationship driven, right? We have an amazing leadership team, starting with our board, a group of people that really are aligned in the right way, that believe in the vision of our club, that give all of our coaches, our directors, myself, the resources and support that we need to elevate, not just from a playing perspective, but from a support perspective and an environmental perspective. So my responsibility is to make sure that obviously we're operating in a unified vision, the base level standard of how our coaches operate, the communication component, working with families, from a technical perspective, having certain standards that, all of our players sort of aspire to and live up to, and our coaches enforce that standard. And I think the unique part that we have is our club has grown so much in the last 5 years from a youth perspective that, you have a lot of new personalities, a lot of new voices. And it's how do you kind of cultivate that and grow that into one unified message. And that's really my responsibility, I think, as a technical director. The number one job of this person, this role, is create and uphold the environment and make sure that there's a standard across the board as players, as coaches, and deliver on a vision that we want for our families, whether that's getting better technically at the youth ages, being able to perform as they get older, building the right habits that allow them to be successful. And then when they get the high school ages, how are we providing them the opportunity to be exposed to the college game or the national team game for the few that are at that level, and that's our responsibility. It's my responsibility as a technical director is to work with our board to make sure that I'm advocating for our coaches and those types of things, and then working with our coaches to make sure that they're upholding the standard that we have. And how do you do that dance with, everybody working together along one vision? And it can be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the right people, but the nice part that we have in our club is we have the right people. So it makes it fun because every day you're around people who are aligned the same as you.
Fantastic. No, and I can imagine it's difficult, just the sheer size of your program. Can you talk about that? I think I read 50 youth programs amongst the women's and men. Is that true?
Yeah. So we have 50 teams between the boys and the girls. And now we're sort of navigating, as the fortunate part of where we're at, where you are now in for our boys side. It was just announced today that we are joining the ECNL, which is a preeminent platform on the boys
Fantastic.
side and the girls side. So now we've become an ECNL club, which we've never really been aligned completely on the boys and the girls side in terms of the same platform, all those types of things. So now we're operating that way. And I think the cool part that it's been a really important initiative on our end and my end is that how do we align all of our programming, all of our processes, that it becomes sequential. So when our youth players are in, what are they building towards? I would we have 2 youth directors who I would put against any youth director in the country in terms of their ability to teach the game, their commitment to their kids, their ability to build within a vision. How do you layer that model into now going into 11-11, into the college placement pathway? Because, when you get to this stage of, kids progressing from 77 to 99 to 11-11, there has to be a sequential model in there from a technical perspective, from a tactical perspective. And, we have 2 guys in Steve Wacker and Boomer Steigelman who are phenomenal at laying the foundation for these kids. And then as they go into 11-11 in our really the showcasing perspective of getting them prepared for college and college recruitment, you have Dave Castellanos, who's he's our boys director. He's the men's coach at Drexel University. I actually played for him at Penn State Abington. And then Kyle Martin, who's our girls director. And having 2 guys that kind of can build into that next model is really, really important, because now for the kids, they feel like they're part of a process that is going to make them better. They're bought into it more, and the proof is in the pudding in terms of how much better they become throughout the years because they're part of a sequential model.
That sequential model goes really far. I'd imagine, obviously, sequentially with the players as they move up in the ranks. Also with the parents, because obviously there's a commitment in time with their children playing with Ukrainian nationals. How do you relay that message? How do you keep the parents engaged to let them know that their children are progressing through the ranks, that they are taking that next step, that the investment is also worth it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's communication, and I remember several years ago. Someone asked me, what's the priority in the club? And I said, people first, people second, people third. You have to have the right people, and that's going to drive the process of everything you do. So from a parent perspective, we look at them, they're incredibly important in the process of these kids getting better and being bought in. And you can see it on the other side when it doesn't go well, that's a really important element. So for our coaches, it's how do you communicate with the parents, not just when it's going great, but also when it's not going great. Where does your kid fall? What do they have to get better? Always convert things to action plans that allow the kid to sort of take ownership of their own development, and kind of put the parents in the seat of, they're the support, they're the safety net. Where I think, right now with where youth soccer goes, a lot of people and social media and all that kind of stuff, a lot of people, parents, sometimes tie their child's performance to their abilities as a parent, where our responsibility as coaches and as directors is say, hey, your job is to be the support. Our job is to make sure that your kid is in a spot to thrive and succeed. And we're going to give them all the tools and resources to do that. Some kids ascend very quickly. Some kids, it takes time. But, our responsibility is to communicate those things effectively. And when you have that, it always sort of settles the message and settles the environment, because everyone feels like they understand what's going on. It's when their imagination sort of runs wild and they don't really understand where their son or daughter is at, because they're not being communicated with. That's when things can kind of struggle, because there's pressure within this game. I mean, everybody has aspirations. I think that's what drew me to club soccer and in this role of like, how do you water that plan of a kid who has a dream? And how do you, whether that's a love of the game, whether that's, wanting to be part of something special, whether that's wanting to play college soccer, how do our responsibility is to put them in an environment where all those things are attainable. And all of that revolves around being a really good communicator. And that's even beyond soccer, right? So that's where sort of we're at. And our responsibility is to make sure that through the parents, they understand what environment their son or daughter is in and where they're currently at, and that they have resources and support along the way.
That's great. You're kind of mentioning almost like the game within the game, right? There's, of course, the actual game being played on the field, but then there's everything, the game of life, as well as just all the learnings that come with it. I'm sure there's players within your program at a certain age, they might realize they might not be there for the next level, but you being there as a leader, them having people, a safety net and their parents, it quickly becomes understanding that there's other things you can do in the sport also besides just being a player as well too. I mean, or your post-playing career, things that you can do. So the model that's being set up with the Ukrainian Nationals is really cool, because I think they can see all the different avenues at play. I want to talk about your avenue, how you got to where you are. You like these transitions, a little corny, but your avenue and how you got to where you are, and your coaching experience, because you have a pretty good resume yourself, and top club like the Ukrainian Nationals, obviously you have to have the experience. So if you don't mind, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, my journey to get here has been sort of an interesting circle. So I grew up in Newtown, Bucks County. I grew up in the area, played locally, played collegiately at Penn State Abington for our boys director, Dave Castellanos, was part of sort of starting that program and getting them that transition. And, as I kind of grew through college, I knew I wanted to stay involved in the game in some capacity. I had, offers in the business world, which I have a lot of confidence in myself, but with that stuff, I wasn't as passionate about it. So I'm very fortunate that the summer going after my senior year of college, was offered a job to be a grad assistant at the University of Alabama in Huntsville.
Okay.
Went there sort of sight unseen, had a boss that was a really good guy, and he was bought into sort of my dream and my work ethic and my ability to sort of want to learn, and went there, was the assistant on the men's and the women's side, had a really good experience. And then as what happens with the game, good people, they get good jobs. And he had left and departed for Arkansas State. And at that time was sort of put in a position where I kind of ran both programs as a 23-year-old kid, and
Wow.
didn't really know what I was doing, but was kind of forced to learn on the fly. And after that spring, they brought in a new guy who brought in his own staff. And, I ended up moving to Kansas, a school called Ottawa University, an NAIA program, won a conference title out there. And similar deal, my boss there, Craig Shaw, got a job to start a program at Fort Hays State, a D2 school in Western Kansas. Stayed with him, so I went to join him at Western Kansas and start that in Fort Hays State and start that program. Won a conference title in our second year, and from there, that's when my career started really kind of ascending, where became the top assistant at Central Michigan University Division I program in the MAC. Through that, my first jobs were really goalkeeper based. I was a goalkeeper coach, and went through sort of the ODP and then U.S. Soccer, the training centers, and was operating those in the Midwest and Michigan. And was there for about 3.5 seasons. Amazing experience, Division I level. Got to coach against some of the best teams and players, and really helped with that program, and got new responsibilities that were not just goalkeeper based. Was there for about 3.5 years, and then got the head coaching position at Mount St. Mary's. So in 2016, I was 29, was the youngest Division I head coach in the country at the time.
Wow.
And was just immersed in the process. I had a really big goal, really big, vision for my career, and was there for a season, and actually ended up meeting my future wife, who's also in soccer. And she was at Rutgers and at PDA at the time. And I was there for my second season at Mount St. Mary's, everything going really well, but had an opportunity to move to New Jersey, which is where she was at. Mm-hmm. And was fortunate to get the assistant position at Sky Blue, and then the NWSL, which is now Gotham FC. So I was there for about a season. And worked with Carly Lloyd, worked with Janine Becky, worked with a lot of really preeminent players at that time. And just it was an incredible experience, a really difficult experience. I think there was the most adversity I'd ever faced as a coach was at Sky Blue, both from a tactical perspective and solving the game, and being decisive as a coach. And those things were really exciting, the amount that I learned. But then also on the other side, the managing the professional personalities of people, and at that point, up to that point, everyone that I had worked with was a college athlete or a club person or club player, and these are not people you were paying to play, and very different sort of mindset that you have to shift, but really enjoyed it. I think I really grew as a coach then. And after my first season there, I knew that I was missing something. I was excited about where I was at, but there were things that I had missed, and I couldn't really articulate what those were.
Sure.
And the more I sort of spoke with my family and my wife, the more I realized that I really enjoyed the relationship element of the game, and I really enjoyed the developmental aspect of the game. And at a really unique time after that season, Dave Castellanos reached out to me. I think it was the fall of 2018. And said, hey, we're looking for a girls director at Yuki's, and it's a build. At that point, I don't think we didn't have teams at every age group. We were EDP, sort of. Some teams were USYS, some teams were National League, some teams were EDP. It was sort of a hodgepodge across the board on the girls' side. But I saw an opportunity there with the history, the tradition of it. And to the surprise of a lot of my friends in soccer and a lot of my family and my wife, I was all in, and I just believed in I had a vision for what we wanted on the girl side, and we just kind of put 2 feet in and did it. And Was there in that role for about 2 to 3 years or so. At that point, we had gotten the girls' academy. We were sort of off the ground there.
Mhm.
Myself, Boomer Steigelman, who's our youth girls director right now. It was honestly me, him, and my high school coach Tim Ketty, who is now the principal at Penridge. It was us three together, sort of building this thing, and it was a lot of hours, a lot of time, but it was a lot of commitment that went into it. So I was there for about 2.5 years. In 2021, my wife had gotten a position down in Maryland, and at that time I was named the ECNL director at Arlington.
Okay.
So got to be immersed in the ECNL director kind of world, overseeing that, working with those teams. Was fortunate to have a group that was really talented, made playoffs, did really well. We had 3 teams make ECNL playoffs, which was the most they've ever had. Worked for a guy that I learned a ton from in Herman Perry, who's still the technical director there, and just got really immersed in that. And then in January of 22, I believe it was, I got the phone call from Bobby Andrews and the board at UP's about potential opportunity to come back. And when that happened, I'm emotionally very tied to that club. There's a lot of hours and time that was put in on the early stages, and the opportunity to sort of see it through and then help the boys ascend as well.
Okay.
Was really important to me. So that kind of kickstarted us in the spring of 22 or spring of 23, sorry. And now we're here.
Fantastic. And it's cool how you've yourself obviously played and you've gone through the youth system. I don't know what that looked like back when you were a player. I'm sure maybe was it different compared to where it is. So yeah. But going through that in high school, college, playing in college, coaching college, obviously professionally, I'm sure at this point, a lot of your friends, fellow coaches were questioning. However, you know where you belong because you've experienced it all at this point. I'd imagine like you kind of have an idea, even though you still are very young, you still have found your spot. It seems like.
Yeah. I mean, I had a really good friend of mine who gave me the advice, don't mess with happy.
Yeah.
And I think when you're in a spot where you're around the right people and you found people that you've aligned with, from a personal perspective, a professional perspective, those things are really hard to find. And I think when you're in a spot that you've found that, you put your 2 feet down and you get to work, and that's sort of where, when I first got to the club, I felt that to a degree. And then over the course of the last several years, especially, particularly I'd say in the last year, I think if you asked all the coaches in our club, we're all bought into each other. I think there's no ego. Everyone believes in one another. There's no there's a healthy competition, but it's competition in a way of like, I want to be, I want my team to be sort of the best or whatever, which is, you want that, right? It's a healthy competition, but there's a respect that we have for each other it's palpable. And I think that's when you have that, it's really, really special. And what I've been really fortunate that through my career, I've had, some of my really good friends that have gone on and become, whether it was Power 4 divisional head coaches, 2 guys that, I spent a lot of time with, in early stages of my career, Nate Norman, who's now the head coach at Notre Dame, Jeff Hostler, who's now the head coach at Michigan State. Similar sort of situations in terms of when we started, where we were, but then as our paths kind of went different ways, they all sort of align in places that were home, where Nate ended up back at Notre Dame, which is where he went to school and where he always felt home. And Jeff is from Lansing, Michigan, and I'm from Philadelphia. And like, the opportunity to build it at our club was really, really special to me. My first 10 years of my work was, I was in a different house every year, and I was my first 4 years, I was in a different state every year. Or different city. And, to the opportunity to come back to represent, our area, really means a lot to me, because having lived in other places for a really long time, you feel that you don't know what you miss until you're not here, and the way people talk, the way people are, the family, all that kind of stuff. It's unique, and that was something that I never really knew that I missed it until I came back to Yuki's and got to do it.
It's home. Yeah. I think the best way to describe it's home. And we're lucky for what we have. It's a great area to grow up in, to play sports, great schools. I can't say enough good things. I'm still in the area myself. So now let's talk about maybe the technical side, not to switch, tone here, but in 2025, I'm sure like data also plays a role of your role potentially, and insights that you gather day to day with. Like, do you guys do anything in terms of like match analysis? Do you kind of what does that look like in today's football soccer landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right now we have a relationship with Huddle that is very, very new. So we're sort of growing that over the next 2 to 3 years, where the biggest difference that I think we've had as a club is that there's a disparity in terms of where one team was versus another team. So you can never really standardize the analytical perspective because teams were in different places. I think the cool part of where we're at right now is that as we go into these next phases where we're a full ECNL club and we have the same level of players sort of across the board that we're going to be able to grow and develop here, there's going to be a standardized approach to our game methodology, our structure. What are our principles and our sub principles, right? And how do we teach them on a daily basis, not just through the sessions, but through the games and through the analysis of film. I think, right now our philosophy is it's team specific, right? Because everyone's sort of at a different level. So our job is to make sure that what does our team need? The coaches, what does my team need? And how do I impose sort of these very sort of simple models into this group? As we now go in the next 2 to 3 years, where we've had this relationship with Huddle, where we have sort of now these mechanisms in place from a platform perspective, all these different things, now we're going to be in a spot that it's going to be a lot more standardized, which is really exciting. So there's people that we're working with that, how do we assess it? How do we sharpen it that it allows us to be the most effective? But I think the simplest form for us, honestly, from a technical perspective, it's, simplistic to your team, right? But then from a communicative point, it's how do you communicate with players where they're at? So your IDP, so every kid, throughout 3 parts of the game gets an IDP. Where are they at? Where do they fall from the roster? What are the technical components they have to get better at? And how do they, what's the action plan behind those things? The way I sort of equate the teaching mechanism is it's 3 parts. From a player perspective, what do you see? What do you decide? How do you execute? Our job is how do you teach all 3 components every single day?
Okay.
Do they understand what they're looking at when they're on the field? Do they have the idea of what the decision that needs to be made based on what they saw? And do they have the technical capacity to execute the decision? The philosophy behind that is a lot of teams, clubs focus on the technical component. But if I don't understand what I'm looking at, or if I make the wrong decision because I don't understand what I'm looking at, the technical component doesn't really matter. So you have to have all 3 components. That's where the video comes into play. So where we're at now as a club, which I'm really excited about, for the first time since I've been here, we're unified across the board. Our boys and girls youth are all in Acela, which is now you're competing among the best youth clubs in our market. Our boys and girls senior are all ECNL, which are competing among the best. You're going to have all these things. So now you can standardize the proper curriculum, which since I've been at the club, the disparity has been inconsistent, if that makes sense. The standard has been different team by team, where now that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier on the podcast that standardization, kind of being systematic, is what's most important. And I think there's like a standardization of maybe that whole IDP process too. Yeah. You mentioned the 3 areas, like 3 key focuses for each player, being able to see back and visualize what they maybe are doing right or wrong. At what point in a player's development do you establish those IDPs? If someone is just
Early.
listening in who doesn't know anything about the sport, or they're new to this, at what point does that start happening?
Early. So we usually start when they're 9,
Okay.
around that 9 or 10 years old. The reality of it is you have to make it to where the kid has ownership, where it's the player that is driving their development.
Mhm.
I think when it's mom or dad that's forcing them to go to technical training or whatever it might be, it's only going to get you to a certain point. So the way we have it is, in the earliest stages, we have our grassroots. The number one responsibility, they have to enjoy it. They have to, like I tell our parents that are at that stage, I know we're doing a good job if you can't get your kid in the car because they want to stay and want to run around and stuff. Like that is our number one responsibility. If you're having to drag the kid out of the car, and that's where it's like, okay, like we need to do a better job. So the priority early on is like the kids have to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Now, how do we teach the basic technical concepts within that? That's our responsibility. But the base level, the most important thing is enjoy playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get to a point where your kid loves it, hey, I want to do more soccer, or I just want to become great, or whatever it might be. Now we add in, okay, here's the individual component. Here's the action plans behind wanting to get better at certain things. Here's where you fall within this element of the game. Here's where you fall within this tactical element of the game. Making sure that they have all these things, but doing it in a way that puts the onus on the player.
Okay.
They'll ask for help. They'll have drills, whatever they need to do. But that's where once you put the onus on the boy or the girl to become better, now we're developing really good habits for when they become 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, right? And I think that's where you can see a really tangible difference where like the kids that mom and dad had to force to do more technical work, it comes out when they're 14 or 15 years old. Because they're not as driven to do it. They haven't had that ingrained, skill in their mind of enjoying the process of becoming better. And I remember, I think it was 2015. I was the head coach for the U.S. team for the Maccabi games in Germany, and at the time, I met with the youth director in Schalke. And we were talking about sort of their model, and I was just sort of curious. At that time, I was not really involved in the youth game at all, but I was kind of curious, how they got kids at U17, U20 that were in their model and thriving, because they had a bunch of kids that were on their full team that were young. And he said they put a premium on the ages of 10 to 13. Of just reinforcing habits, because that's where habits get ingrained in players. Technical habits, training habits, character habits, tactical habits, all these things, that's the sweet spot for a player. That is the most growth you're going to see in a kid in 3 years, right? 16 to 19, not as much. But 10 to 13 is like the growth is going to be enormous, right? So our job is how do we water that plant in those age groups, that those kids, not just that they're becoming better soccer players, that's a given, right? But are they in love with the process of becoming better? That's our job, because everybody loves winning. Everybody loves, playing the game and winning championships and all that kind of stuff. Separator is, do you love the process of becoming better? And that's the job of a club, in my opinion. Yes, we want to place kids in college. We want to have kids get opportunities to play on national teams, right? We've had, I think 6 players on the girls' side that have been called into national teams in the last year, right? You have on the boys' side, Josh Jones that just got drafted to MLS. All that stuff is great. But the idea behind it at the youngest ages, and this is what I think makes our youth program really different, is our coaches teach these kids how to enjoy the process of becoming better.
Sure.
And then by the time they get to that 11-11 stage where the environment gets turned up a little bit and it becomes more intense, all those things have already been ingrained in them.
When they're 14, 15, 16-year-olds outside of that 10 to 13 space, They go home to their mom and dad, and then they're back at the house and they're maybe putting in extra work. Whereas otherwise they wouldn't be doing that, because that's also a component of it too. It's not just what you do at practice with the Ukrainian Nationals and what you do when you're on the pitch or what you do in between matches with the team, but it's also what you're doing on your own too, to get better. And I imagine if that's not ingrained between that 10 to 13, very few kids are going to have the aptitude just to do that. Right. So that's huge. And I think, there's a component of, I'm sure you see, where you see some players that imagine who are youth, we're talking about 7, 8, 9, just naturally gifted. And then it really is that next stage of development. They have all the talent in the world, but there's players who probably outwork them, or who, right? I'd imagine that happens too.
Yeah. I mean, and I use, we have a bunch of kids in the club that are really good examples. Like we have a girl, Maya Raganandanan, who is with Jamaica, who she's currently playing overseas in Reading. But, you look at when I was coaching her when she was 12 years old, 13 years old, what she was doing on her own every day during COVID and all that kind of stuff. Like there's a reason that these kids get successful at certain ages. You have Kylie Maxwell, who is in the U19 women's national team for the U.S. Like, there's all these kids have laid a groundwork at a really young age of doing more, that by the time they get to where it really counts, it's habitual. It's not something for them. It's not more. It's just part of their process. And I think that's the thing that had really excited me. Like when I worked with Carly Lloyd, in my opinion, from an outsider perspective, I'm like, man, this is a lot. I was with her 2.5 hours after training, serving balls in, for her to work on, volleys or headers, whatever it might be. And it was not like once in a while, it was every day. You look with Janine Becky, I had to put, balls into her feet, different spots of the field, whatever it might be, where she had to train different things and serving, whatever it might be. Like all these people who become great, it's habitual. Josh Jones, who's playing with Louisville City right now, who's at our club. I remember when I first got there, he was there every day. He was there training by himself every day. All his things in terms of becoming better were all habitual. But by the time he got to Louisville, and by the time he was a captain there, it was just part of his process. It wasn't anything new.
You hear that in elite athletes. I mean, it's the greatest of all time. Another Philly local, Kobe Bryant, they say he was in the gym at 4 a.m. every day, or just about every day. And you expect someone even like a Carly Lloyd, when they get to that level, well, can't you ease off? But if you're the one asking that question, there's a reason you're not at that level. Not to put that person down, but that's the truth. I ask the same questions. Like they get to that level where they're the best in the world. You'd naturally, someone would at that point maybe take their foot off the pedal, right? But to stay at that elite level for so long, and I guess you could equate that to youth too. To still, they're still, an elite level, and Ukrainian Nationals are competing at that, and to stay there and to stay consistent, the players need to bring it. Yeah,
I think. I one of my favorite lines is from Arteta in the all or nothing thing, where he says I said this to our coaches, and I even said it to one of our teams. There's a difference between confidence and complacency as an athlete. And I think when you get complacent and you're comfortable, you are screwed. You are once you feel good of where you're at, you're going to stop getting better. And I look at our number one job as a club is to make our players uncomfortable, is to put them in positions where they have to overcome things, where they have to continually be challenged and getting better, because there's no light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to this. Like there's no athlete that gets to the end and says, all right, I made it, cool. Like now's the easy part. Like there is no light at the end of the tunnel. Like it's a constant of failure, getting better, overcoming that, and failing again. And that is a cycle that we have to put our players in pretty consistently, because that is what's going to allow them to grow. The moment they feel like they have it, that's it.
That's why you never really see players exit their careers after that, top moment. Yeah. Messi could have retired after his World Cup title. Tom Brady, came back. you look at these players, what gives them that ship is that they always want more. They always think there's, and also the love of the game, right? They're coming back because they love the game. And it seems like that's also a huge ingredient to it. And that Ukrainian nationals are also incorporating is that love all the way through and fostering that with the game.
100%. Yeah. I mean, that's what, if you don't love it, you know, we had this conversation last year. Like, if you don't love soccer, I don't know why you would subject yourself to how hard we work and how hard we teach our kids, right? Like, it's intense, and you know, particularly for our academy setting, you know, for our youngers, it's obviously very fun, but when they get older, our job is to prepare them. And if you don't enjoy the game, like, it's not always going to be fun, but there has to be that base love of playing. Like, you have to enjoy that element of it, or else, you know, why do you do it?
Let me ask you a couple of questions about you and your love for the sport. What team do you support? And if I guess the other question would be, if you had to pick a manager or coach that you think like embodies the way you look at the sport, who would you pick? Someone that you believe you see eye to eye with. Okay,
I would say so, Man City, but it was Man City before they got all the money.
and how did you fall into that? What was your
at the time, it was like, when it was Fox Soccer, it was just early stages.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was a club that I watched play. I think it was Richard Dunn. I was like, man, I loved how he played, and I watched the game, right?
Sure.
When I was younger, I loved Juventus, but I never saw them play. And so Man City, I got to watch a lot, you know, when I was, you know, early college. Late high school, because at that time all we had was the Kicks.
Yeah,
so I was a big Philadelphia Kicks fan. You know, I'll say that. But you know, that was before the union and everything. But Man City, I kind of fell in love with how they played, and you know, at the time, I think it was end of college or early when I really got into sort of the tactical element. Sven-Goran Eriksson.
Okay.
I really enjoyed the way they played, the consistency in their possession, the way they repressed. You know, they were elements of control and chaos, how he played, which I loved. Obviously, I love Pep now, but I think when in the early stages when I was really looking at you know, how they were playing, I really enjoyed watching his team's game. When he went to the national team and all those types of things, I think they did a really good job. So as I kind of, you know, got older and got more into it, you know, he was someone that I definitely looked at.
It's interesting. So our audience is expansive in terms of people from all around the world typically tune in. So you'll get some people from Germany and wherever, Ireland, just tuning in this episode. And I think for a lot of Europeans listening, it might seem strange that I even asked that question, because typically where you're born is the team that you support because there's a regional team. That's not the way it's set up in the United States.
Right.
Right. And I asked you earlier, I'm sure in your youth, it looked a lot different. In your youth, as well as my youth, the union didn't exist.
Right.
The kick, when we talk about kicker, we're talking about an indoor team, the Kicks, right? An indoor soccer team. That was the preeminent professional team in the Philadelphia area. You couldn't just turn on the TV or get in your car and drive to a professional football match, soccer match. So to me, that's just interesting. Frame of reference when I ask that question for anyone who's listening.
Yeah, it was, I mean, that was such a unique time because in the late 90s or mid to late 90s, I mean, the MLS was just growing. I mean, it was just getting started and it wasn't as accessible. I don't think they had a pretty, you know, lucrative TV deal. So if you wanted to watch games in Philadelphia, it was 6-on-6 or 5-on-5, whatever it was. And that was it.
Yeah. And if you were older and could walk into a bar, the game was not going to be on. That was never, they would have 6 ABC News on before they put a game on.
It'd be Philadelphia Wings lacrosse before soccer.
That's true. So it's come a long way, and youth soccer's come a long way. And Ukrainian Nationals is obviously a leader in youth soccer, especially in the Philadelphia area and the Northeast. So Joe, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. It's been really fascinating talking about you, hearing your story. And I've learned a lot.
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And looking forward to a lot of really exciting things. So we appreciate it.
Thanks again. And guys, if anyone's listening, if you enjoyed this episode, Soccer Stories Podcast, hit like, subscribe on YouTube. We're on Amazon, Spotify, Apple, all the major podcasting networks. You can find us there. Once again, this is Brian McDonough signing off. Take care, everyone.